Thanks, Elizabeth. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. As Elizabeth mentioned, my name is Rob Boggy, and I'm the Director of Research and Membership at TCSE. And this, as she also mentioned, is part of our Successful Schools case study series, where our goal has been to dig deep into our state's data, identify schools that are doing exceptional things, and better understand what's driving those results. And so our goal with these case studies is to not only highlight the great work being done by charter schools in our state, but also to share strategies and ideas that can be replicated and scaled. So if you'd like to read the full report for today's webinar or our other case studies, you can find them on our website, and Emily shared that in the chat. Now, today, as Elizabeth mentioned, we'll be hearing about the great work that's being done at Nashville Classical East, and particularly their work around third grade literacy. Nashville Classical Charter Schools provide a rigorous, joyful, and classical education for students from kindergarten through 8th grade. A classical education at these schools means that schools emphasize character development through core habits like focus, integrity, resilience, scholarship, and teamwork, while delivering a curriculum centered on great books, fine arts, and foreign languages. Their approach is designed to equip students with the knowledge and habits necessary for success in high school, college, and beyond. The original Nashville Classical East campus, located in East Nashville, opened in 2013, and a second campus, Nashville Classical West, was launched in 2023. Diversity is central to the school's mission, with families coming from all over the city. At many zoned neighborhood schools in Nashville Classical's cluster, diversity is limited. Due to local demographics and housing patterns, racial minorities and low-income students are concentrated in a few schools. Nashville Classical, on the other hand, has worked intentionally to build a student body that reflects the diversity of Nashville through strategic outreach, free transportation, and an open enrollment policy with no geographic preference. The school's leadership believes this focus on diversity helps students learn to think more critically by exposing them to different perspectives, and also fosters a learning environment where students are seen and supported as individuals. The school's commitment to educational excellence, especially for diverse student populations, is reflected in its strong academic outcomes. Most importantly, for the purpose of today's webinar, Nashville Classical East ranked in the top 14% of all Tennessee public schools for third grade ELA. In 2024, it was also the top-ranked school in Davidson County for third grade ELA proficiency among economically disadvantaged students. Today, we have several leaders and staff from Nashville Classical with us, including the founder and executive director, Charlie Friedman. As the founder and executive director of Nashville Classical Charter Schools, Charlie leads a diverse K-8 community of 3 schools spread across 2 campuses that build a foundation for high school, college, and life. Over the past 12 years, Charlie has grown Classical's staff from 8 teachers to more than 100 employees, increased enrollment from 89 students to over 650 scholars, and achieved academic results exceeding every district in Tennessee. Charlie has a bachelor's degree from Yale University and a master's degree from the University of Pennsylvania. He lives in East Nashville with his wife and 2 children. We are also joined by Sarah Paquin. She's an assistant principal who led Nashville Classical East's 3rd and 4th grade ELA teachers. Sarah's a talented, experienced educator. She joined Nashville Classical after teaching pre-kindergarten in Memphis with Teach for America, where she was a 2011 core member. Ms. Paquin was TFA Memphis's only pre-kindergarten teacher in the 2011 core. And while in Memphis, Ms. Paquin led her pre-K students to a mid-kindergarten reading level and received a nomination for Teach for America's prestigious Sue Lehman Award for excellence in teaching. Ms. Paquin was a founding kindergarten teacher at Nashville Classical and a founding 3rd grade teacher as well. She taught 3rd grade for 7 years before becoming an elementary assistant principal. We are also joined by several of the teachers at Nashville Classical East, including Sarah Stackhouse, who has taught 3rd grade for the last 2 years, Haley Lassane, who's taught 2nd and 3rd grade, and Trish Dewart, who has taught 4th grade for the last 2 years. So thank you to our Nashville Classical East folks for joining us. Now, I think a good place to start, and Charlie, maybe this is best suited for you, but can you take a few minutes and tell us about the story of Nashville Classical, going back to the beginning and charting the path for how you got to where you are today?
Sure. Thank you, Rob. And I apologize if you hear any background noise. We are trying to teach my 5-year-old son how to play a board game downstairs, and it is going rough so far. So if you hear someone screaming and crying, about something not being fair. That's either him or his mother. But the story of our school really quickly. Um, so I grew up in New York City, and I was lucky enough to attend a K-12 independent school that was really focused on a pursuit of knowledge and believed that, knowledge was kind of the foundation of future success and truth. And in fact, actually, the security guards at our school used to wear a uniform that said they were defenders of the liberal arts. And so it was a really amazing experience where, we read a Shakespeare play every year starting in sixth grade. And we were really sort of part of this larger conversation of great texts that when you went to college and entered the workforce, you had sort of all the references and background knowledge that you needed. And so I came out of college and started my teaching career as a seventh grade reading teacher in Philadelphia, working with Teach for America in the school district of Philadelphia. And one of the things that really shocked me was the lack of curriculum and the lack of clear guidance. And so, in fact, we had essentially what was called the book room. It was a closet full of novels. Um, and we were encouraged to pick one. And I ended up choosing a book based on the fact that there were enough for every kid in my class to have a copy. And when I started reading it with my class, found out that I'd chosen a book they'd read the year before. And it was actually several weeks into the school year before they told me. And so, just sort of long story short, our school really struggled with a lot of the fundamentals, staffing, curricula, student culture. And that was discouraging because our students were so wonderful. And so, even though I felt like I was able to create a strong classroom, it was really an island. And my students oftentimes moved on to other classrooms in our school or other schools in our district that didn't serve them well. And there were also a number of students, often high achieving ones, who went to magnet schools or an independent school. And I realized that they were actually really underprepared because the rigor in my classroom wasn't the same as the rigor in the best schools in the city. And in particular, they were underprepared because there were, experiences that they'd never had, their peers had never had, books that they'd never read. And they were just sort of, coming from so far behind with a knowledge deficit when they got to high school. Um, and it got me to thinking that there just really must be a better way. And so in the spring of 2011, I applied to a program called Building Excellent Schools that was working with the state of Tennessee as part of its Race to the Top grant to recruit and select and train and equip leaders to open new schools. And so they accepted me in maybe April 2011. I packed my bags and moved to Nashville that summer because I'd heard that the education ecosystem here in Nashville and here in Tennessee was so innovative and supportive. Um, our school doesn't open for 2 more years, and so I spent the next 2 years doing two things. First, I traveled the country and carefully studied other, world-class, diverse public charter schools. And since opening, Nashville Classical has continued to innovate. We've continued to refine. We've continued to grow our model, and we're still trying to grow and improve every day. But our school really began with a national study of what worked. And then the other thing was that, after sort of days spent studying those schools, we'd spend the nights, codifying. And so really trying to put together all of those practices in writing to document them and make them replicable. And we actually wrote, an 800-page application that described our school's curriculum, our culture, our operations. And today, even though it's been over a decade, and despite all the changes, outside of our building and inside of it, our school really does look a lot like what we described in that proposal. And then the other thing we did was, we recruited families and teachers. And so we went to playgrounds and churches and libraries. We'd meet with people at, kitchen tables and sort of basements of rec centers, and would really ask them about their hopes and dreams and make promises about what our school would be like. Uh, and the school opened July 31, 2013, with 89 kindergarten scholars. Ms. Paquin was one of those teachers that first year. And those students, their families took a huge chance on us. And one of the best parts of my job is seeing them, grow and become flourishing adults or young adults. And so they're juniors in high school now, and they're leaders in their classrooms, they're leaders in their student governments on the athletic fields, and they just give me hope that brighter, better future is possible. And so, like Robert said, since opening in 2013, we've really grown from an idea to over 650 scholars from all over the city. And over the next decade, we're going to grow to educate more than 1,000 K-8 students and really try to prove that diverse integrated schools can exist in Nashville and in one of the fastest growing cities in the country. Um, and like Robert said, when they graduated in 2022, our founding scholars outscored every district in the state of Tennessee on the TCAP, and in fact, their ELA scores were particularly high. But our newest kids aren't far behind. And so the students that Ms. Stackhouse and Ms. Lassane taught last year that Ms. DeWerta is teaching this year ranked number one in all of Davidson County for economically disadvantaged performance in reading. And I just think that's really a testament to more than anything else, our teachers and to Ms. Paquin who worked with them and led them. And so, I'm really proud of how far we've come, but also know that our best days are ahead of us, largely because of the people on this call.
I love that. So now, folks are welcome to read the report. We hope you do read the full report. But the success that Charlie just described doesn't happen by accident. So, what we've outlined in our report are sort of the findings of what we think would be replicable and scalable strategies for achieving similar results elsewhere. But as we did that, we sort of saw that there were two broad categories of policies and practices, and we called those strong systems and great people. And so during this project, it became clear to us that you folks at Nashville Classical have systems in place that set the stage for people to thrive, both teachers and students. So I think it makes sense to start with some of the systems at Nashville Classical. And two come to mind that I'd love for you to touch on, but feel free to add others as you think it's appropriate. But I'm particularly, or I hope folks would be interested in hearing about your intellectual preparation and your culture of goal setting.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. So I'll start off, and then Ms. Paquin, if your voice is feeling up to it, please chime in. And then also Sarah, Haley, and Trisha, please add on as well. So let's start off with intellectual preparation. And so, like a lot of schools and like a lot of districts, we've adopted a variety of curricula over the past decade, and in particular, over the past few years, have been focused on curricula that researchers are deeming high quality and this idea of high quality instructional materials. Um, I think one thing that we've learned in implementing those materials is that there's a big difference between a lesson plan and a curriculum that comes off the shelf, and lesson preparation, which is the work that teachers do to deliver the plan. And so that's a place where we've spent a lot of time over the past few years. And I think our third and fourth grade humanities teams are really setting the bar for what this work looks like in our school. And so I think the easiest way to sort of understand this is that, a lesson plan basically tells you what to teach, but lesson preparation is understanding sort of why to teach it, when to teach it, and how to teach it. And so, when we ask our teachers to prepare lessons, we ask them to do three big things. And so in reading specifically, and particularly in third and fourth grade reading, we want our teachers to start by identifying what we call the productive struggle in the text. And what that means is the moments of a text that are worthy of close reading and analysis. And that may seem obvious, but I think actually in a lot of ways it isn't. That's because, all texts and all moments of one text are not equal, right? And all types of reading are not equal either. There's a difference between close reading, where you might systematically read and reread a short passage to try and understand an author's craft and structure, and reading aloud when you might, read to your class and with your class for fluency and enjoyment. And so the first sort of step for us is for teachers to really ask themselves, why does this text matter? What are the moments when kids are going to be grappling with understanding? What are the moments when they're going to be illuminating sort of author's craft and structure, and the sort of meaning of the text comes to most to life? And so then the next thing that we want our teachers to do is to actually adjust their lesson. And again, this is a crucial step that's easy to overlook. And that's because when curriculum writers create a curricula, they're creating it for the broadest audience possible. And so they don't care if you have 75 minutes in a block or 90 minutes. They don't know if you have 10 students in your class or 30. They don't know about the fire drill that's going to interrupt your lesson. And so I know that a lot of districts have a really well-intentioned focus on fidelity, where someone from a central office comes, to make sure that a class is on page 43 or question 17 of a pacing guide. But I think that can really backfire because great teachers should adjust and adapt. And we want our teachers to specifically adjust and adapt their lessons to ensure that they're spending most of their time on the most meaningful parts of the text and, the most challenging and rigorous activities. So once they've sort of thought about those things, we'll ask teachers to actually prepare how they will teach a lesson. And so, curricula often come with the questions that a teacher is going to ask. Really good curricula also come with sort of answers that you want to hear students say. But I think the best teachers come prepared with what students actually will say. And so, what I mean by that is, they're thinking about what is a student who's almost there going to answer a question, and how is that different from the ideal answer? Or what are sort of minor errors that might illuminate the difference between understanding a text literal meaning and a deeper meaning? And so our teachers will work together to anticipate student responses and prepare potential prompts they can use to guide the class discussion. And so they'll even think about specific students and what these students might say. And they meet as either a grade level team or with their coach to practice the upcoming lesson. So I'll pause there and maybe I'll ask Haley or Sarah or Trisha if any of you guys want to just sort of share what your experience has been like with intellectually preparing lessons.
I can go ahead and share. So yeah, like Charlie said, we put a lot of like back end work before we prepare or deliver a lesson to our students. And so going through the lesson and looking at the productive struggle and how students may anticipate answering that question. Something that we do is, like he said, write kids' names down of who we really want to zone in on in that lesson. We also target priority scholars that are right there on the cusp, but we really want to make sure that they're meeting the expectations that we want them to be able to succeed for the school year. But something that I find really helpful is that we meet approximately once a week with our team, and in those meetings, we'll either talk about the unit, the internalization of the unit. We'll talk about data from exit tickets of the week, and we do a lot of adaptations to our lessons in those meetings where we will see like, oh, there was actually this gap in yesterday's lesson. Instead of moving on tomorrow totally skipping over that gap, we'll come up with ways as a team, as Paquin will lead, of how we can really address those misconceptions so that we're not letting any students fall behind or letting any cracks slip through the hole and everything. So I think that's really helpful. And then another thing we do is we meet every morning with our grade team, our humanities team, and we'll go through and each of us will share what we found to be our productive struggle each morning, and we'll kind of bounce off ideas. So lots of times Sarah or another person on our team, Christina, will share that they found that question 2 was the biggest productive struggle, and we get to just kind of share ideas and how we want to make sure that each scholar is being is getting their needs met. And so I think that that's been really helpful, just collaborating with our team to share ideas.
Yeah, and I think like I can build off of Haley here. One thing that we do very well is collaborate. Like I oftentimes come and my ideas or my thought on what the productive struggle might be will change based on whatever Haley or Christina's productive struggle is. So being flexible, being able to like cooperate with our team. And also one thing we do, we don't only come with like the productive struggle and what responses students might have, but we also think, okay, if a student comes with that response, what can we say or do in return to help them understand the most challenging part of the book? Either that be writing down a page number for them to go back to, saying, go back to this annotation, or what did the character feel like? All of the little prompts that we plan for really help our students understand like the most challenging part of the book for that day.
And so, talk to us a little bit about your goal setting. I think that's really a powerful part of your school.
Sure. So I'll start off here, and then again, would love for teachers to talk a little bit about it. And I think both Haley and Sarah touched on this a little bit, thinking about things like what it means to have like priority students and stuff like that. So, like a lot of schools across Tennessee, we administer Ames Web Plus, and we administer it in the fall, winter, and spring. And we set 3 goals on Ames Web using historical data. So first, we set goals for students who are scoring at or above the 50th percentile, which we consider a proxy for grade level performance. Next, we set goals for scholars scoring at or above the 75th, which we feel like is a pretty good proxy for TCAP mastery. And we've seen pretty consistently that when students are hitting that benchmark, there's a pretty high probability that they're going to score mastered or on track on the TCAP. And then last of all, we set goals for growth. So students scoring at or above the 50th percentile in their growth percentile. And the other thing we see there is that when a class has about 2/3 or more of their kids hitting that benchmark, that's a pretty good proxy for them getting a 4 or a 5 on TVOS. And so, we've gotten better at this over time. And I think probably if you talk to us a year from now, we'd hopefully be even better at it. But one place where we're trying to improve is also looking more closely at racial, economic, and other subgroups. Um, but the idea is that, we're using this data to really understand exactly which kids are essentially on, the cusp of another benchmark. And we don't necessarily use that to give kids like tutoring, or it's like, bring all of those kids to the front of the room and, um, teach them specifically. Instead, what I think is really helpful is having sort of a student in mind where if you're talking to a teacher and saying, hey, what is the difference between a student who's on grade level and a student below grade level? To really make that concrete, right? That is a kid who is in your classroom. What are the things that that student is good at? What are the things that that student is not good at? And then when you're looking at student work, using that data to ensure you're pulling a representative sample of student work. And so we'll have teachers meet and we really try to think about what does it look like to, move a student from just below proficiency to proficiency. And we're able to use AimsWeb to make sure that, when we look at student work, we're sort of looking at work that really reflect kids who are on the cusp of achievements. And so again, I don't know if it's helpful, but Trisha, Haley, Sarah, if one of you guys want to talk a little bit more about just what data meetings look like, or sort of your priority monitoring plans, and just sort of that work. But what we try to do is make sure every quarter we're sort of going through a cycle of, who are the kids that we thought would move? Did they move? Why or why not? And then what can we do differently in the next quarter?
I can talk about that just a little bit. This kind of builds off of the intellectual preparation conversation that both Haley and Sarah were having before as well. Students on our priority monitoring plan who are looking to move to that 50th or 75th percentile can then be written really easily into your lesson on, oh, I want to make sure this student's been working on fluency, and so I'm going to make sure that I call on them to read this section of the book because their goal is fluency and I need to give them that opportunity to actually practice the fluency. Or this scholar is really focusing on vocabulary this quarter. We saw a drop in their vocabulary score on AimsWeb. I really want to make sure that as I pull out the new vocabulary from this unit, I give this scholar a chance to use it in front of the class and feel comfortable with it, and also go back if I realize that they're not fully understanding a concept. And so by having that list of scholars handy, like personally, I write it on a Post-it note and keep it really close to me every single day so that I can keep in mind exactly which scholars are working on which goals. We're really able to hone in and make sure that scholars are making that growth that we're looking for, and also to adjust during those data meetings that we do have to make sure that we're not ignoring gaps that might still exist.
Yeah, and I can also add on here where like us setting the goal is one thing and us doing the work, but also investing like the scholars in their goal is really important. This year and last year, like kids knew what percentile they were at. They knew that they were trying to grow. And because they knew that, they were really invested in like putting in the work themselves so that they could achieve their goal. But yeah, I think also back to Trisha's point about like the PMP scholars, like those priority kids are right at the cusp. And so we really pour a lot into them. Not that we're pouring, not that we're not pouring into the other students, but like when we're analyzing data, like we're really deep diving into what those scholars are working on so that we can help get them to the next cusp that will make sure that they're successful on TCAP.
That's great. So I think it's clear from hearing you all speak that you have some great staff. So in addition to the systems that we discussed, you also, as a school, put a lot of energy into staff recruitment, development, and retention. And so tell us a little bit more about how you attract, cultivate, and retain excellent teachers and staff. And specifically, If one of you could touch on the coaching model and potentially the looping up model, that'd be great.
Great. I'm happy to start off here. So, just briefly, right? I think an amazing teacher is really irreplaceable to a school. And when talented teachers have great support and great curricula, the sky is the limit. And so we've tried to design our school around fostering and supporting talent, which is hard to do on public dollars, but worth, a lot of our time and energy. And so just a few kind of thoughts around how we sort of recruit, how we support, and then how we kind of think about our teams. Um, so, our number one talent tactic is staff referrals. And so we try to go out of our way to encourage our current staff to refer people because we really feel like our staff are going to be our best ambassadors. And so we both offer staff a $500 stipend or bonus if they refer someone and we hire them, and try to also speak to staff about specific openings and vacancies. And the idea is right that if you're sort of an A player, if you're someone who's on the team and knows about the high standards and high expectations we have, hopefully you're going to help bring other people that also are able to meet those expectations. We've also, over the last few years, created a number of stipended opportunities for our teachers, including sort of opportunities for team leadership and mentorship. And so those opportunities both, I think, provide teachers with chances to build skills while contributing to the day-to-day operations of the school and staying in the classroom. They also help the school because we have a group of leaders who are impacted most by decisions day to day. And so they're on the ground and kind of share feedback with our administration. And then last of all, it's a way to compensate, longtime classroom teachers and continue to increase their compensation and push that forward. And then one of the things we did 2 years ago is use some of our remaining ESSER budget, so our COVID recovery funds, to encourage looping. And at the time, there was some emerging research around the benefits of looping. And so Haley was one of the teachers who was part of that first team. And so she taught her third graders after having been with them all in second grade. And so we'd love for her to talk a little bit about her experience. But, our hypothesis was that there would be huge benefits to student culture there, right? And so the first day of school is more like the 181st day. And that particularly would be beneficial in third and fourth grade when kids are making this transition from foundational literacy to reading to learn and comprehension, because it would be really, really powerful to have teachers who sort of understood that transition and could help them bridge that gap. And so, Haley, by all means, if you want to kind of jump in for a moment, would love to kind of hear what your experience was as a teacher who looped.
Absolutely. I think of my years of teaching, looping last year was one of the absolute best opportunities I've ever had as a teacher. It was one of my favorite years ever teaching. I think that great teachers can sit there and intellectually prepare a lesson and look at data and do all of the great things that teachers do. But I think that something that's irreplaceable is relationships with students. And so by building a relationship with the same group of kids over a 2-year basis, I got to learn those students inside and out, just with their reading literacy, their foundations of literacy, which was so awesome. But I think that in second grade, we focus so much on phonics and the foundations of becoming a great leader. And in third grade, there's this huge shift where it's the first testing year and we stop teaching them how to read and we start just saying, hey, here's this text we're looking at. Let's dive in. Let's learn about these characters and their thoughts and their feelings. And this is what dialogue is and all of these exciting things. But I think by having such a close relationship with those students in second grade, I knew that, hey, these 5 students are still really struggling with fluency or they're really struggling mastering these digraphs or whatever it may be. Like Charlie said, it was like the 181st day of school where on that first day of third grade, they got to come in and I got to start pulling them from the horseshoe at the beginning of August to keep working on those skills that we were focusing so much on in second grade. And I think that that has really empowered them for that year of third grade reading because they knew that I knew them so well and they knew that we were on a team together. And so I think that it was just really, really cool to have that opportunity to be able to loop up with those kids, 2 years in a row. And not just the students, but their parents as well. I think getting families involved with the data and with their reading is just such a huge part of it all. And so the parents were working on the same plans that we were in second grade, and we just got to kind of continue that through third grade. And so if I could leave with my students every year from second to third, I would do it again and again and again, because I think that it just made such a strong foundation for both our relationship and just building their reading skills in third grade. So it was awesome.
That's great. Full disclosure, I was actually part of a looped classroom back in the 90s. So it's I can attest it's a great experience for kids. All right, so moving to the next question, you have been a long time adopter as a school of the science of reading. And so my next question is twofold. For those who may not know, can you provide a brief summary of the science of reading and why it works? And then two, tell us about how you've helped staff not only implement the science of reading in their classrooms, but you've done so in a way that really ensures that every student's needs are met.
Yes, I can speak to that. And thank you to my team for doing most of the talking. I've been a little sick, so I can't promise that I won't cough through this. But yeah, so to start, the science of reading is a body of research that shows how the brain learns to read. It tells us that reading isn't natural. We aren't born knowing how to do it, just like we are with speaking. And instead, our brains have to be explicitly taught how to connect letters and sounds to form words and meaning. And so you can think of it like building a house. First, you need a really strong foundation. This is phonemic awareness and phonics, where students learn the sounds in words and how letters represent those sounds. And without this, reading will always feel unstable. And then next, we can frame the house with fluency, helping students read words automatically and smoothly. And this allows them to focus on the meaning rather than struggling with each word. And then we can add the walls and the roof, which is vocabulary and comprehension. And when students understand word meanings and sentence structures, they can fully grasp what they read. So, for example, if a scholar sees the word cat and they know the sound cat, they can blend them together. And if they see a new word like chat, their phonics skills help them sound it out. And so over time, this practice builds fluency, expands vocabulary, and allows them to read and understand complex ideas. And so the science of reading research is really clear that this structured, systematic reading instruction based on these principles does help all kids learn how to read, no matter their background. And so when we teach reading the right way, we can and do change lives. And so a huge part of that happens in our wonderful K through 2 team that Haley was a part of. A lot of us have been a part of over the years, and it doesn't end when it gets to third grade. Once students have mastered the fundamental skills and are fluent, the most important driver of understanding at that point is background knowledge. And so, a common misunderstanding about reading comprehension is that it involves transferable skills like making inferences or finding the main idea that, once learned, can easily be applied to any text. But unfortunately, there's really little evidence that the skills translate. And instead, there is significant evidence that the skills happen naturally when readers have sufficient background knowledge to understand a text. And so to then go back to the house metaphor, background knowledge is all of the plumbing and wiring. It's everything you don't see, but it makes the house work. And so we selected curricula rich in background knowledge and used knowledge organizers to reinforce key background knowledge for our scholars. And I see I have a question in the chat. I can go ahead and answer it now. The curriculums that we use to implement the science of reading at our school in K through 2 is the core knowledge curriculum. And then in 3-4, it's the fish tank curriculum. And something that we use to build that background knowledge with the fish tank curriculum, even though it's not provided, are what we call knowledge organizers, which are created in-house. And so I'd love to pass it off to one of my lovely teachers to speak a little bit more about either knowledge organizers or give examples of some content-rich units from Fish Tank.
I can speak to the fish tank curriculum really quick, just because I think we have a really great example of how fish tank helps to build background knowledge through it, while also actually supporting that love of reading and reading to learn in fourth grade specifically. Just recently, our students finished up a unit on The Wild Book, which is a book that is written entirely in poetry. It is set in 1912 Cuba, told from the perspective of a young girl with dyslexia, which obviously very few of our students actually have any background knowledge in any of those areas. They do not live in 1912, they do not live in Cuba. And while some of them do actually have dyslexia, it's a very small portion. And so through Fish Tank, there was a whole setup of here's the history of Cuba and what was happening in 1912 specifically. So our students have that background knowledge on that. We spent a lot of time talking about what is dyslexia? What does that look like? What does it mean? We use that through videos, through articles, and just were really able to build their understanding so that then we could focus on during our book, what is poetry? What does it mean? What does this symbolize? How do we understand this? And our students walked away really just in love with the book itself, as well as the content that they'd been exposed to.
That's great. And I see we have some conversations going on in the chat. We have some time set up for questions at the end, but if you do have questions throughout, feel free to drop them in there. And to our panelists, you're more than welcome to answer as we go. But to move on a little bit from the science of reading, we'd be remiss not to talk about the charter school model, right? So for anyone who may not have gleaned this so far from our conversation, Nashville Classical is a charter school. Which means that they're afforded more flexibility than a traditional district school, but are also held to a high standard in terms of student achievement. And so as our last question, I'd love to hear about why you chose to found Nashville Classical as a charter, and how has that model helped you achieve the results you have?
Sure, and I'm happy to start here. So, just for me at least, I started my career in traditional district schools. And I think it's the majority of kids were and are and probably will be educated in traditional district schools for a long time. But for me, the independence and autonomy that a charter school offered were really essential and part of what attracted me to being a school leader. And so, when our school first opened, it was really important for us to be able to select our own curricula. Um, and at the time, balanced literacy was the norm. And we really wanted to buck that trend. And so part of our charter application is actually like a waiver that says, hey, we want to have the opportunity to choose and select our own curricula. And we were really excited to use a knowledge-rich direct instruction curricula. And I had read the work of E.D. Hirsch, who was a professor at the University of Virginia and had written about core knowledge. And that fall, a publishing company called Amplify had just sort of like published their first set of core knowledge language arts materials for sort of consumption by schools. And so we were one of the first schools in the state to use it, using kind of the first edition of those materials. And since then, CKLA, right, has become one of the country's most popular and highly regarded early literacy curricula. But you almost needed to have sort of opportunities for folks to have independence, to have autonomy for innovation to happen. And so we were able to adopt it early. We were sort of part of proof points that now at this point, there are sort of proof points across the country that CKLA really works. And again, a reason why we're able to do that is because there was autonomy we were offered as a charter school, and that autonomy only worked because it was balanced by an accountability for results. And so in designing the school, we felt a profound urgency to, identify and select curricula that was going to educate our diverse population and make sure every child learned how to read. because we knew that we would be accountable for our academic results, right? We would close if we would not perform. We would close if families didn't trust us. We would close if we wasted public dollars on a curricula that sat on the shelf. And those are extreme examples, but I think that the sort of idea of autonomy and accountability going hand in hand was really, really essential to our success. And then I think the other key point here is just around sort of choice and people. And so, we hire our own staff and families choose our school, and that creates a community that's, racially, economically, geographically, um, ideologically diverse. But we all sort of agree to share this one school community, and that's a really powerful thing to have in common, despite all of our visible differences. And so, I think across Tennessee and in a lot of our big metro areas, right, systems of neighborhood schools are unfortunately only going to perpetuate a lot of the sort of segregation and racial and economic isolation that already exists in our neighborhoods. And so I think Nashville Classical, at least for me, that was something that I personally really cared deeply about and thought that a public school choice model where there are no geographic priority zones, there are no tests to get in, there are no fees, was going to be the best way to build a community where families from different neighborhoods and socioeconomic backgrounds to come together to create an inclusive learning environment that their kids could share. And that was important to me for, lots of reasons, which is that one is that research shows that diverse schools improve academic outcomes and they reduce bias and they prepare students for success in a multicultural society. And around the time our school was opening, there was one of the most sort of robust longitudinal studies on economic mobility in 20th and 21st century America was being conducted and then eventually concluded. And so it was done by Raj Chetty and the Opportunity Lab at Harvard. And one of the things that they concluded was that, the most important factor in helping a low-income kid get to the middle class wasn't the school they went to necessarily, or their teacher quality, or the quality of their principal, or what curricula their school used. It was actually if they had friendships and relationships across economic lines. And so that was really humbling, right? Because it sort of means that like the person sitting at the desk next to you matters as much as the book on your desk or the teacher at the front of the room. Um, and I think one question that schools need to ask is, how are we creating communities where those relationships and those friendships can be built? And so I really do believe that, charter schools, because they don't have those geographic priority zones, because there are no tests to get in, because they're really built on choice, they offer families high quality options outside of their neighborhood boundaries and, essentially ensure that uh, opportunity isn't limited by, zip code or income. And I believe that, Nashville Classical, I hope, is, creating leaders for the 21st century, in part because of our diverse classrooms.
I love that. Well, with the time we have left, I think it'd be a great time to take some questions. So if you have questions, please drop them in the meeting chat. We've already got two in there, which right now are, is Fish Tank on the state approved list? And the question from Laura here is, why did you decide to shift from CK to Fish Tank in third grade?
Yeah, I'm happy to start here. So my understanding, I do not work for the State Department of Education. There may be someone on this call who does. But my understanding is that Fish Tank is not on the state approved list at the moment. We did have a waiver and then also resubmitted that waiver as well. And so it is a really intentional choice by us. Um, and I think, that waiver is really contingent on us getting results. So I think that's important. And then in the spring of 2023, we did a review of a few different potential curricula for upper elementary, just thinking about what would work best. And we did sort of look really closely at both CKLA and Fish Tank. One of the things that we were a little bit concerned about was that we wanted to see slightly stronger text complexity in CKLA, and sort of like quality of text, particularly making sure that kids were reading novels and sort of like authentic texts rather than kind of texts that were produced for a reader or a curricula, particularly as they moved to third and fourth grade. And so that was a place where we felt like CKLA was a little bit, or Fish Tank was a little bit stronger than CKLA. And then the other place that we thought Fish Tank was a little bit stronger was in having sort of like a larger humanities course vision versus just sort of segregating out ELA and social studies. And so I don't know if Sarah, I know you were sort of part of that process, so I don't know how well you remember it if you want to talk about that. Um, but I pulled up the document from when we made that decision. I'm reading off of it right now, so that's where my references come from.
Yeah, I think you were onto something with the fact that it's really helpful that with our current model, all of these teachers on the call and all third and fourth grade ELA teachers teach three subjects, which is kind of a big ask for third and fourth grade because the content, gets intense. And so it's really helpful that they're teaching like the same exact curriculum for both their ELA class and social studies. Like they look exactly the same. They're even called the same thing. We just call them social studies on our own. So that's really helpful for from a teacher experience. And then one of the main reasons we had to make a shift was because we changed the model of our third and fourth grade ELA classes and cohorts in general. So we went from having one ELA teacher in third grade and one ELA teacher in fourth grade that were using Reading Reconsidered curriculum, which is written for middle school, or an in-house curriculum that was based on Reading Reconsidered. Um, and that knowledge lived within that one teacher for third grade and one teacher to fourth grade. And so when we switched to having three teachers per grade teaching ELA, we really needed a more like scripted, more official curriculum, not just the in-house version that I had made. And so that guided our shift there as well.
All right, do we have any other questions? Well, I just wanted to thank you all for joining us again, both our panelists and our participants. And again, you can read the full report on our website, where we'll also have a full-length recording of this. Oh, we asked a question about the recording. That's great. We will send this recording out to everybody who registered, and it will be available on our website. And if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to email me at robert@tnchartercenter.org. So that's robert@tnchartercenter.org. Maybe Emily could drop that in the chat, and I'll pass that on to our folks. And thank you. Have a great day.